You're listening to the Spend 10K a Day podcast, brought to you by the performance marketing experts at Mute6. This is your source for cutting-edge insight into the world of online advertising from the team with more Facebook case studies than any other agency on the planet. Here are your hosts, Steve Wise and Stuart Anderson.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another amazing episode of the Spend 10K a Day podcast. Coming to you live from the ultimately rainy, foggy LA, Los Angeles, California. Yes, you heard it right. Raining and fogging today. Disgusting. We're safe, though. We're in the podcast room, so we're all good. Today, I have an awesome guest. Long-time e-commerce brand builder, direct-to-consumer expert, extraordinaire, Dan King. Dan has scaled two businesses to 8 figures. CMO, number one, Me Undies. He was instrumental in the growth of Me Undies, a CMO of Me Undies. I'm sure you've heard of them. Fun in a box, one of the coolest brands on Facebook. And today he's a CMO of Ritual, which is vitamins. Dan, welcome aboard. Tell us a little more about yourself and your background, man. It's awesome to have you.
Thanks, man. Steve, you're a good friend. It's great to be here. So it's raining here in LA. I grew up in the Midwest, so it's pretty normal for me.
So Dan's from Cleveland. For all you curious of where the Midwest is, so he's a nice Clevelander. Cavs finally won the championship, so he's been in good mood for the last year and a half.
All we needed was one.
Yep, all we needed is one. LeBron brought one to Cleveland.
He can do whatever he wants now.
Yep. So now if he leaves, no one's unhappy. He brought the championship to Cleveland. So cool. So Dan, getting into it, man, how'd you get into e-commerce? How did you have this skill and expertise? What originally brought you into the wide, amazing world of e-commerce? Tell us a little more about your experiences and how you started working at Me Undies and just some of your background.
Yeah, great question. I was lucky to be in positions where I had the opportunity to make a million mistakes and just learn from that, and so it all started. I guess it's funny to think about, but about 10 years ago, social media was a new thing. Yep. It feels weird to say that now because it's everywhere, but back then businesses really didn't know how to use social media to achieve any sort of business goal. They weren't even thinking about it in that way. There's no advertising. There's no paid version of it. Yeah. There was barely a news feed at the time. Maybe I don't even think there was.
No.
So
totally wasn't.
So I got involved in that pretty early on, and worked for, I guess what you could call a social media agency, but we didn't even know what it was at the time. And we started working with a few different clients, and started to just show them how you can use social media to drive traffic.
Back then, it was organic content. It was
pure organic.
It's wow, I'm going to post something on the news feed, and people are actually going to see it.
100% of people will see it, not 5%.
It's all my fans are going to see me talk about the raid outside just from posting on social media. That was the beautiful days of early Facebook. Then Facebook's wait, something's wrong here. We're not making money off all the postings. Why is this? So yeah, obviously the fun stopped, and then I guess from your agency, then you moved over. You learned a lot there. Then you moved. I guess you moved to LA, right?
So I was in LA at the time. It was about 10 years ago, and then one of our clients was an e-commerce brand. I call it it was e-com 1.0 era. That this was a time where it was a very different game, and I think there were no playbooks for e-commerce companies. Everyone was kind of figuring it out for themselves. One of our clients was a company that raised a lot of money. They were growing really fast here in LA, and they liked the work we were doing a lot, so they actually just brought our whole team in to be on their marketing team.
That's an agency's happiest nightmare. It's one day you walk in the office, you're where'd the team go? They're all gone.
Yeah, so they just took the whole team, and we're cool. We felt at the time that this was potentially a really big business. It was the fastest growing company in LA at the time.
Which company was it?
It was called Beachmint.
Beachmint, okay.
And so what the company did was they partnered with a celebrity who had their own built-in audience and launched an e-commerce vertical with them. And we partnered with a few different celebrities. And what was great is, right out of the gate, the celebrities would announce that they're launching this brand, and it would create like a great little kind of like boost right out of the gate. And we showed a lot of growth from that little boost, and so we were able to raise a lot of money from that.
Yep.
But we didn't know what we were doing, and as a result, we weren't investing in the right areas of the business, and we weren't doing the right things. But at the same time, we had a lot of money, so we were also bringing in like the best consultants, the best resources, whatever software we wanted to use. So it was also an opportunity to just like learn, and I learned a lot. I learned about the mistakes we made, but I also learned just like
what were some. If you were to pinpoint a couple of mistakes, obviously you guys were venture backed. Money, investing in stuff that's going to make money wasn't the issue. You had resources. There's a lot of companies out there and people who are listening to this podcast who work at venture-backed companies who have resources. This is really interesting. Like, what were some of the mistakes specifically that you made while at Beachmint that you learned from that you kind of carried on till today?
Yeah. And I want to preface by saying, like, I worked with really smart people, really good people, so I don't want to, like, dwell too much on the mistakes, but just, like, the broad strokes that informed, like, my next job at Me Undies, I can highlight a couple of those. One thing I think is just like investing in the customer experience. Yep. Like, to me, that is the most important thing. That's like the one differentiator a direct-to-consumer business has over like a heritage brand is like the relationship you have with your customer. And so you have to like really value that and perfect that. And like that should be like what you care about above anything else.
And what were some, talk about mistakes about not valuing the customer, both at Beachmint and both right now. What are some of the mistakes that you see? I know I see them a lot from being on the side of acquisition, of really discounting, trying to get people in, just trying to throw everything at the table. Just give me a customer. Yeah. When you, both in your career at Beachmint as well as Me Undies and now Ritual, what do you see have been some of the mistakes that you've made that you've kind of corrected as well you've seen other brands make?
Yeah, I think when you just care more about top-line growth and you're not really thinking about retention or the quality of customers you're bringing in. So, for example, like, the tried and true approach back in the eCom 1.0 days was, heavily discount your product to get someone in the door, sign them up for subscription. Sometimes they don't even realize they're signing up for subscription, and then make it really hard for them to cancel. Like, that's like the worst customer experience. But when all you care about is top line growth, that's what you do. And so you're not really thinking about the big picture. And as a result, you're not prioritizing the customer experience.
And I guess like a lot of that goes into the economics of the business. So like if you are a venture-backed company, sometimes you're not always running a fiscally responsible business. You have to show growth. You have to go into board meetings. You have to really continuously show numbers that investors want to see. And I think that's always a big, that's something to really understand is like, whenever we work with companies, we're always like, in a perfect world, what are the numbers? What are the story that you want to tell? And I think you look back at some of these older 1.0 companies, they're like, give me subscribers, give me, anything, I'm going to discount the product, I'm going to put stuff in the terms and service that people don't know about. And, you see that's led to the demise of a lot of companies who just didn't prioritize that customer experience.
Yeah. And there's outside pressure that's driving that too, right? Because if you take on a lot of venture capital, they're expecting, this like tech style hockey stick growth. I believe that brands don't grow that way. Brands are built like it's a marathon, not a sprint. You can't just like overnight have a great brand. It's something you do with excellence over time. And so you can't outpace the growth of your brand. And I think that's what a lot of e-com companies do when they prioritize growth and they kind of grow unorganically.
So you kind of took a big pivot, man. Like you went from Beachmint, who's kind of this white label celebrity focus, to speaking of brands, you went to Me Undies, which is obviously and Ritual, two really good brands that have leveraged Facebook to drive acquisition, to really drive a sustainable business.
Yep.
What did you learn from a brand side, like while at Me Undies? Like how did they kind of differentiate themselves early on as someone that's, that has a really fun experience? Like obviously, you prioritize that, being, when you start building that, like tell us like how could brands overall prioritize being sustainable, being long lasting versus just hockey stick growth, or maybe do both.
Yeah, I think that's the balance that you have to strike, is like investing in the brand, but also like being like very data driven and performance oriented with your growth strategy. So you have to do both, right? And I think it's just naturally like sometimes companies just think one way or the other. It's hard to think about both, and the brand stuff can be really hard to quantify. So some people who are more numbers driven just don't see, like, they can't quantify it on a spreadsheet, and some people that like are more brand driven, they're very emotional, they're very artistic, like they don't really get the science behind performance marketing. So it's really about blending both together, creates like the fastest growing brands in today's world, in my opinion. One thing that when I went to Me Undies, I knew that building an authentic brand was just like it was very important to creating brand loyalty. It's important to differentiate yourself in the market. At the end of the day, we're selling a commodity, and it doesn't matter how good our media buying is. At some point, people are going to try another brand of underwear. So brand becomes very important for us to continue to scale. It's just hard to, I think, map out what that looks like early on.
What are some of the exercises? Because I always tell companies, I give advice as well. I'm like, define your brand. What are people thinking about when they think of your specific brand? What kind of exercises did you do? Like brand exercises did you do when building out the brand at both Ritual and Me Undies? Like what? Yeah. Let's go down and quantify what that means when it comes to like defining the brand. You mentioned that a lot. Well, if you're going to give advice to people on who are listening to this podcast, like how would you define what the brand does? What are the brand exercises to really nail that down?
Yeah. In the beginning, it can be really simple. You don't have to overthink it. I have like a few kind of like ways to think about it early on. You wanna have a brand that stands for something and that has a clear mission. And I think it's very easy for people to say like our mission is to sell the most underwear in the world, but that's not a mission that's going to get people to root for you. That's like a very business driven mission. So you want to have a mission statement that kind of puts the consumer's goals in it as well.
Kind of aligns the consumer's goals with your goals.
Yeah. The best missions align the consumer's goals with the business's goals. You said it perfectly. So that it sounds simple, but very important. And the difference is you go from having you're this new hot startup, and I think just naturally like people in our generation are just naturally skeptical of ads and like what are they doing, right? So to turn them from a skeptic into someone that's going to root for you, have a strong mission, right? That's going to give them an entryway into what you're doing and have them want you to succeed. It's very important.
That's interesting. I think you said something that just resonates with me from a branding perspective. There's so many DR companies out there that want to build brands. How can you get consumers to root for you?
Yep.
That's a big brand question of like what can we say in our core values? What can we make our brand stand for? That people who not only just buy our product, but people who hear about us want to root for us. And I think with Me Undies, I was a Me Undies customer before we actually even worked together at Me Undies. So I love the brand. I rooted for Me Undies, not because I was a customer, but just because I love what they stood for. So I guess it's a big question. If you're a brand out there, what can you do to get people to root for you?
I think you have to be passionate about what you're doing from the top down, and you have to start the business with a real reason. And I think that authentic reason for why the business exists, like people can know, people see that whether it's subconscious or not. So and sometimes companies don't know how to articulate it too, and they end up articulating it a little bit later. So like one example I always talk about, Airbnb I think is a great example of a company that got off to a really hot start. They had like a really interesting business model. They were disrupting an entire industry. But I think there's a lot of people who are just always skeptical. Like, why would I want to stay in a stranger's house? Like, I just don't get it. And once they started to talk about their purpose, and their purpose is like, we want you to belong anywhere, to feel like like what it's like to live in a place and not feel like a tourist in a new city. I think that like that brand purpose just became something that turned skeptics into believers like overnight. And I think that's been like a really great example of like how, you know, a well-articulated mission can really kind of like take your brand to new heights. But it also provides a sense of like clarity for like even your employees, because at the end of the day, like everyone on your team needs to be aiming at the same goalpost. Yeah. And when you have a great mission, it just helps focus. It makes sure that they're focused on the right things. It becomes a tiebreaker in argument. Should we do this? Should we do that? So the mission also helps internally as well.
It's interesting. You know, a lot of times I feel like, you know, companies have employees working for them. There's no purpose in what they do. You know, and I think it's a really good segue to the next thing that I think, Dan, you know, we've talking, you know, long times about this specific topic, and that's hiring. For those of you that are listening to this podcast that have built great businesses and you're trying to figure out how do I get out of the day-to-day of managing ads? How do I get out of the day-to-day of video? Because you know that if you're doing your Facebook ads and if you're doing your search ads, or if you're doing your landing page optimization and you're the CEO, you know, you're not that time could be better spent managing and building, you know, and delegating. And I think, like, how do you attract the right talent from a digital marketing perspective? That's what, you know, every brand from Me Undies to Ritual to any, you know, plethora of other brands, the way they've grown is through hiring great people. Yep. What have you learned? You know, you've obviously built teams at Me Undies and Ritual. What have you learned from what goes into finding the best people, and, you know, what do you look for when it comes to hiring marketers and you know, what do you look for during those interviews? I mean, I have my angle that I always look for and the questions I always ask, but I love to pick your brain on that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I think I definitely look for certain traits, and just talking about marketing hiring specifically, I like to put a team together that is I think there's a spectrum of marketers where they're either like very quant based, very data driven, and then the other end of the spectrum, they're very like brand, they're artistic. So I like people who can kind of sit at the intersection of those two worlds and can kind of blend the art and science together a little bit. And I've found that when you do that, you bring in people who work really well as a team, and there's less like, hey, it should be this way or it should be that way. And then also, like, you know, as an example, like people who are, you know, in Facebook advertising on my team, like they can empathize better with someone who's coming at it from the lens of like, this is what I think we should do for the brand. And sometimes you have to make those decisions where, you know that you can do something that will drive growth much faster, but you don't want to do it at the expense of the brand, right?
The customer experience.
And the customer experience and doing what's right. So people who I think can kind of empathize with, you know, other viewpoints into marketing, I think creates a better culture. So that's definitely one thing. The other thing is like, you just want to have people who are just like insatiably curious. Like the marketing is changing every day. It's moving so fast. What works today is not going to work in the future. And I don't want people coming in thinking they know the playbook. They're just going to take what worked over here and bring it over here. I want people who are like, you know what? I don't know everything. I'm going to work really hard. I'm going to figure it out. And I think that mindset is really critical to building a team, because you always have to be willing to learn new things.
Yeah, and to build on that, like, I think those are two amazing points. But what I'm always looking for along with that is empathy. I think that, you know, when we hire people here at Mute 6, like, we're always trying to find people who aren't scared to say, I don't know how to do that, or I've never done that before, but they're willing to get their hands dirty. I think fitting within the fabric of a team and being able to show empathy and vulnerability and being comfortable with yourself, I think is really huge, because the reality is that there's a lot of people that could run ads. There's a lot of people that could do design. There's a lot of people that could do a lot of stuff, but there's not a lot of people that could fit within a framework of a team and really bring value to the team beyond just the ability to do one or two tasks.
Yeah. And honestly, that's why I love working with Mute 6, because like everyone here has just like a lot of passion. Like they do it for the love of the game. Like you could tell. And those are the types of people I want to work with.
Yeah. And I think, beyond just, Mute 6 or Ritual, I think that you have to, and I see it so many times with hiring, is that people hire people without looking at the big picture, optimizing toward the long path.
Right.
Like when I hire someone, or when Mute 6 or sure Ritual, you guys we agree, we want to have this person on long term. We want them to be long-term players. And I want to optimize that process to say, I want you here year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year. And I think there's a lot of companies out there that really go into the hiring process with, okay, we'll give you 3 months. If this works, boom,
right.
move on to the next one. I don't think that's especially in this society where, talent is hard to get. It's hard to, I think we have to value people more than most companies. And I think that's the reason why we built a great team. We don't have many people leaving our company. That's something I prioritize as CEO.
That's a great sign. I also think a lot of companies just like hire to fill gaps, and maybe they'll hire someone who brings in a better skill set today, but they're ignoring someone who maybe doesn't have that skill set, but their trajectory is going to be way higher, right, over time. So you got to think long term with your hiring too. Like who's going to be at a better place 2 years from now, not just who's going to fill a gap today.
Totally. Let's moving topics a little bit. Let's talk a little more about direct to consumer. The evolution of direct to consumer businesses.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've seen, over the last 6 or 7 years, it's changed a lot. Now you're at Ritual. You started with Ritual, and Ritual is just kind of like an idea phase. It was very early stage, and now it's becoming a very mature, very successful, fast-growing e-commerce brand, serving the needs of, multiple people in the vitamin space and the health space. In this day and age, like, to be successful on Facebook, to have a full funnel strategy and to really do retention properly, what are some of the, advice that you'd give to really think about, building a customer experience that will scale?
Yeah. It's
I know
that's a broad topic,
and I want to keep it broad for a reason. I want the first thing that comes to your head, I want you just boom.
Yeah, I think it's just like build the right foundation, and I think there's there's always like this urgency to move quicker, but to me, like the brands that are scaling fastest in the direct to consumer world have like a great foundation, and so I'll describe what that means a little bit more. There's a couple ingredients I think that are common across a lot of successful direct-to-consumer brands. One being like you got to have a good product. Like, I mean, it sounds obvious, but like there's a lot of like mediocre products out there or products that just aren't different enough. I think it always starts with having a great product. And I think the best products also kind of have like this baked in organic word of mouth thing going, where they're just like really easy to talk about. And I think some brands do a really good job of like giving their customers the tools to talk about them. Because I think when customers like your product or like your brand, but they don't know exactly like how to talk about it, they're not going to talk about it. I think some brands like just make it really easy.
What are some tools that allow brands to make it easy and accessible for their customers to talk about their brand?
I think it's just like creating magic moments like within the customer journey. So for example, like there's some brands that have just like an incredible unboxing experience. And I think some companies will be like, we can't really justify the cost to like invest like and take away some of our margin by making this incredible unboxing experience. But what you might be missing out is like if it's such a great unboxing experience, like that person may post on social media and then talk about it with 5 of their friends. That to me is like invaluable, especially in today's world where paid advertising is expensive, it's competitive. Like you have to have a more organic like word of mouth strategy. So like one example that comes to mind, I'm not exactly like, so you sent me what was it called? Man Crate box?
Yeah, Man Crate box. Yeah.
Like to me, that is so genius because what they did was they send you this like this huge box and like a crowbar, like a legit crowbar that comes on top of the box, and like you have to like wedge it open with this crowbar. Like it's totally unnecessary and goes against like every like best practice of like making like opening a box easy. But like all of a sudden, like my wife is like filming me trying to open this box, and like I have like 100 friends commenting on her post, like essentially talking about this company. And I think that's just like such a magical moment that they created within the customer journey. And it's stuff like that I think is really exciting. It's like, it's the same reason that like everyone is talking about Allbirds all of a sudden out of nowhere, right? Like whatever they did, like gave their customers tools to talk about the company. And there's other like really cool shoe brands that people don't talk about, but they talk about Allbirds. So just like why, like trying to understand why, and then like reverse engineer that for your company.
So I guess beyond everything, beyond just the review, beyond just, obviously everyone's emailing after you buy, give us a review, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Well, beyond the review is how do you allow consumers to capture their experience with the brand and really make it accessible and easy for them to talk about it if they like the brand? I think there's not a lot of people that really think so literally about just, how do I get this one consumer very simply to create 7 consumers, to create 9 consumers? Because that's what really grows brands. It's not just being the best at running paid ads or being the best at running search or doing the best creative. It's that long-term customer journey that literally, I had Jeremy from Man Crates on a couple podcasts ago, and we actually talked about that, about how, how they got the crowbar opened, and it makes it sticky. I know when I'm gifting something, Man Crates is the first place I go because it is an amazing experience that people remember. And I think how do you get people to remember your brand? I mean, that's another thing you should ask you when you're doing a brand exercise. How do you get people to remember?
Yeah, I think it's just like going the extra mile and doing more than like what you're supposed to do. I was like, I saw the other day that Southwest or someone was complaining on a Southwest flight because they wanted to follow the score of NCAA basketball game, but the Wi-Fi was like too slow. So Southwest tweeted back and said, "Hey, like here's an update on the game. It's 58-56 or whatever at halftime." And then every like 2 minutes, they sent him more updates about the game, so he could literally follow the game. And someone at Southwest, like on their social team, like just literally like took the time to like provide this like unbelievable experience. Next thing you know, that tweet thread goes viral, and like now, millions of people are talking about this. So it's just like going out of your way to do things that are special, even if you don't think that it's going to go viral. But it's those types of things that create this relationship with your customer that might be hard to scale in theory, but if you do that, that's going to separate you from the next brand.
Cool. No, that's great. On the flip side, if you're United,
Yeah.
There's Southwest on one hand, which is very thoughtful, and then there's United, which isn't very thoughtful. I don't know if we have to go into that, but that's I'm sure you can Google what happened with United. Before we wrap things up, Dan, is there anything else you want to add? I think we've covered a lot in this podcast. I'd love to have you on in the future again. I think we've covered brand, we've covered hiring, we've covered some of the cool examples of like how to build a sustainable brand. We've talked a little bit about direct response, but I think the biggest takeaway from this podcast that I have is that building a brand from zero to 8 figures is not about just running ads.
Yeah,
there's a lot more that goes into it.
Totally. I mean, I would almost think about it. It's like 0 to 1, then 1 to 100. That 0 to 1, you just have to be different. You have to go the extra mile as much as you can until you get that foundation. And then once you have that foundation in place, your funnel's working, your customer experience is on point, your email is great, the whole customer journey is mapped out and it's perfect at every touch point. Then you go from 1 to 100.
Yep, that's great. All right, cool, guys. Wrapping things up. Thanks, Dan, for coming on the podcast. Stay tuned to another amazing podcast coming up after this. Chat soon.